Thanks for inviting me. What I'm going to do is share some thoughts with everyone about my experience thus far in Suds, and I've called this Making Places with Water because I think, in essence, I think that's what landscape architects can contribute here. I'd stress, really, this is a personal view. Some of the schemes that I'm going to show you, some of the pictures are of DSA work, and some aren't, and I hope really that these illustrate where landscape architects in particular have made a difference and have helped to make places. The traditional way of looking at Suds for years was the Suds triangle, which people are probably familiar with, and what we generally concentrated on, amenity and biodiversity, was shoved away into a corner. So it looked very much like that for a long time, with water quantity really emphasized, and you can understand why this is, I suppose. It's because flooding and excess water is expensive, it excites people's interest, it's dramatic, and it tended and still tends to dominate people's thinking. And this is the kind of thing that can result. This is a photo taken by an engineer, actually, Anthony McCloy, in Ireland, and I think people would probably agree that this almost certainly works as a flood attenuation feature, but it's a lost opportunity, really. It's difficult for people to enjoy, and we worked out there's probably £25,000 worth of fencing around this basin. It's just outside Dublin. The new Syria Suds manual, a weighty tome, aims to try and rebalance this situation and introduces this graphic. I suppose you'd call it the Suds square. I'm not entirely convinced that this is happening, because the essence to me of sustainable drainage is about trying to get back to treating water in a natural way, to replicate what happens in the natural water cycle. As a geographer originally, this is quite dear to me. And from the Landscape Institute point of view, documents like this talking about green infrastructure I think are really useful, because they cast an overview of what sort of places we aspire to achieve in, making the most of our landscape and making the most of the assets in it. And that seems to drive, to me, to the heart of what sustainable drainage is about, although perhaps it's a rather awkward name for a great thing. Now, we are in danger still with the current attitudes in persisting with the notion that water is dangerous, it's unwelcome. And I can appreciate, of course, the emotions behind this signage. This isn't a school in Leicestershire. But I would ask the question, does this send the wrong message about our attitudes to the presence of water to everyone? And what do we do about it? So there it is. The focus still, in many ways, is management of flood risk, and I would challenge that this is something that landscape architects probably need to be addressing. Places like this is a housing scheme. It's absolutely dead standard. You see this around the country. This is from Melton Mowbray. Still create features. This is in the old parlance, a balancing pond, and it's designed purely, it seems to me, to attenuate surface water and control flooding. It doesn't really do much else, and you could regard it really as an example of wasting land. we call this pipe and pit planning. You know, at some stage in the planning process, somebody has decided to put the attenuation basin, as it's now called, but it's little more than a balancing pond, at the bottom end of the site. Job done. And this is also an example of suds, and again you can understand why this happens. This is in urban areas where land is at a particular premium, and the way to control water is very much about putting tanks in and solving the problem, in inverted commas if you like, that way. But is it really suds? You know, does the water available for people to enjoy? Maybe it can't be made easily available for people to enjoy in these sorts of situations. But maybe a lost opportunity. Again, here's a scheme on a housing site in Leicestershire, Leicester Forest East, where this is promoted as a suds solution to the site. There's what amounts to a French drain at the bottom of that, well, they call it a swale, but it's not particularly interesting, and I'd ask that, you know, wasn't there a more creative way to deal with water? It seems to me this is conventional drainage, putting the water underground and forgetting about it, but rebranded maybe. An example from Australia, where water sensitive urban design, WSUD, has been current for many years. This is a rehabilitation of a creek in Newcastle in New South Wales, and very early on New South Wales recognised that interpreting what is going on in the landscape so that people can engage with it is a fundamental part of changing their behaviour and possibly their attitudes towards water. And of course in Australia, sudden very high intensity storms aren't anything new. You know, they have a particular problem with their climate and landscape. It's either raining like mad or it's very, very hot, with all the problems that can cause. Some examples from around the world. I was lucky enough to go to Portland a few years ago and get a view of that city's approach to water. And this is an interesting story, because there was a fellow called Tom Lipton, a landscape architect at Portland City Council. You can see him in the flowery shirt there. And he happened to be the right person at the right time when Portland was looking at ways in which it could address combined sewer overflows into the Willamette River. And Lipton approached this and advocated a slightly different way of looking at the problem. You know, could landscape treatments be used across the city as an incremental way of cleaning water and attenuating water before it hit the river system? And this has been taken very, very strongly now in Portland. It's the only place I've ever been where there are guided tours to the city's drainage system available in leaflets at the airport. You know, quite something, and very much landscape led and landscape driven. We have some examples in this country. This is a little scheme by Bob Bray in Stamford in Lincolnshire, and it shows how with the right, sometimes quite modest and surgical interventions, you can reveal the water system, and of course this is providing not just a biodiversity benefit, but also an amenity benefit. Children can play in it, people can simply see it and appreciate where the water goes. Nottingham, this is a scheme by Groundwork and I think Nottingham City Council in the north part of Nottingham, retrofitting some bioretention into existing streets. Very, very modest interventions we've managed to achieve thus far. Another Bob Bray scheme, and the only example of a scheme really that I can think of on any scale which shows suds in a more or less conventional housing setting, is Landrove in Cambridgeshire. And this is the Attenuation Basin, to strike a contrast with the ones that we've previously seen. And there are lots of little details in the scheme which, again, illustrate how water can flow in a different way around the landscape. I love this site. This is the man in the picture is Roger Knoll at Sheffield City Council, and he again worked with Bob. Roger is a very keen and well-respected advocate of what can be achieved, first of all, at a planning scale by looking at the problem maybe in a slightly different way. Houses have been built more or less conventionally on the left-hand side there, and then an existing park, this is Manor Park in Sheffield, has been used to accommodate some, if not all, of the stormwater, and opportunities therefore suggest themselves. So the housing area and the park start to work together in a way that enriches both. We've, at DSA, we've been doing this for a while, and we've been all the time advocating that at planning stage, if you manage to establish green infrastructure and green-blue infrastructure thinking at the outset and put that into people's minds, you've got a fighting chance of having land allocated to Suds, and that's really what we were trying to do with Leicester City Council at Ashton Green, which is a big development proposal on the north side of Leicester. On a smaller scale, simply asking the questions, could water be part of this landscape? This is a medical centre in, again in Leicester City, next to Victoria Park, where we worked very closely with the architects and engineers and also officers from the City Council to try and get something a bit more interesting than what was originally proposed. And frequently, as a landscape architect, it's not about necessarily designing stuff, I don't think. It's about this advocacy. It's about understanding a little bit about what's going on in the context, and then applying your landscape thinking and intervening at the right stage to get something back. Sometimes it's about doing the drawings and explaining how the system might work. This is a scheme in Blackpool where we managed to, as a result of the contentiousness of the scheme, this is a big building and car park being put into an existing green space. We managed to, working with the City Council, the Town Council in Blackpool, convince them that by using techniques such as Suds and putting swales in, we could actually get some benefit, some landscape benefit back, reduce the overall impacts of the development proposal, and actually create an exciting place. What we managed to do here was work with local schools. There was no requirement for us to do this as part of our brief as consultants, but we identified that schools are going to be interested in doing this. They neighbour the site. We have 2 schools neighbouring the site. We invited them to participate, and they took us up on their offer. So this is small children now helping to build, if you like, what amounts to their new park. So small children understand a little bit about where the water goes. It's also cheap, of course, if you can get children to do the work for you. Suds and Swales. This is a swale. It's a much maligned term, it seems to me now, but a swale could be very, very simple. Very, very shallow sides, and simply a way of moving water from one point to another by using gravity. We had a lot of resistance to putting swales in car parks, but it can be done, and it does not need to be complicated. It's not even difficult really to maintain. There are issues with it, but we managed to put quite a lot into Blackpool, and it's worked really quite well. Similarly, this is a medical centre, so perhaps a more ornamental way of looking at the opportunities that water might provide. This is a scheme now in Solihull, where we've identified with Solihull's landscape architects, the Borough Council there, the opportunities that might be provided by creating some attenuation next to a housing site in an existing open space. So biodiversity, but also the opportunities for natural play. We're not calling this a play area as such. It's simply something that could be played in by children, by anyone, using the level changes and just some very, very simple interventions. Children will play anywhere, so why shouldn't they be stopped from playing in these sorts of features? And in schools we have a particular opportunity, I think. This is a scheme called Melton Vale Post-16 Centre in Melton Mowbray. It's very highly regarded. It's quite treasured by the people who work there, the staff and also the students, and it's designed for learning. And it's something that we monitor quite carefully, building up a relationship with the teaching staff and encouraging them to actually get children, students outside working in this landscape. It's not just Suds, of course, there are other things there, but getting them to work with the landscape and understand how natural processes can operate and how our intervention can assist in that. So this really is what we're after. The idea is that, from my perspective, ultimately as landscape architects, we are trying to get people to engage in the landscape, and water is a great way of doing that. So that's some ideas and thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, David. That was really interesting. I loved your pictures. It's a great one, a great one to end on. Okay, I'm just going to open this up now. Have a look. So everybody listening, if you have any questions for myself or anyone we can direct them to at the Landscape Institute, or David, or anyone in his team, now is a perfect opportunity to ask any of those questions you've been thinking about, Suds related questions. Don't worry if you can't think of one just now, because as always we will be sending out 24 hours later a feedback form, so you can give us any thoughts, feelings or questions then. And as always, this is being recorded and it will be immortalized forever on YouTube. You can embed it on your website. We'll embed it on our website, and you can have it forevermore as a resource and a learning tool to share with you. So if anybody has any questions, I'm just going to give everybody a minute now to get in touch with us and have a think back through. David, maybe you can go back to the first slide to keep your email address up on screen so that anybody's wishing to jot it down has got a minute now.
Okay. There we go. It's not on there, but my email address is
the website.
Yeah, the website. You can get in touch with us through the website. Yeah.
Okay. What's this slide here? What's this scheme of?
This is called Forest Way School. It's a special needs school in near Colville. It's quite elevated, as you can see there. You get a cracking view to the south over the Mees Lowlands character area, if any of you know the area. And what we managed to do here is to persuade teachers at a special school that they didn't need to fence what would typically be regarded as a hazardous feature. So this is an attenuation basin. We did this scheme with Hunters Architects and Arup over up in Nottingham. And to the right there you can see that we managed to design in a ramp, and that's wheelchair accessible, so that children can be brought down to experience the water firsthand. And this is an experience, of course, that special needs children don't get in their daily lives. You know, they don't get to experience the even very limited peril that might be associated with a pond. Frequently, we just made a film actually with Ciria, C-I-R-I-A, who produced the, amongst other things, Suds guidance, and we had children in this pond doing ponds maintenance and generally enjoying themselves. So it's a really interesting little case study of how, with the right intervention at the right time, and certainly not a great deal of money, you can encourage people to, first of all, take a little bit of risk, and secondly, get involved in the landscape. And as I say, that's really one of the things that, as landscape architects, that I think we are duty bound to do in this. It isn't necessarily solving the drainage problem. You know, we work with civil engineers and others who are focused on that. It's maximising the opportunities that the notion of Suds can present.
Yeah, and it's obviously, the younger you can get people involved in Suds, in the landscape, and seeing the importance and the effect it can have on, you know, everyday life and everybody's life. I think it's so important. That's fantastic that you work with schools like that to make that happen. That's brilliant. So, well,
that's right. And yeah, I mean, we were talking earlier, Lauren, weren't we, about the danger of losing sight in your daily job with all the pressures of it, of what you're actually trying to do. And to me, this sort of scheme, and every scheme isn't like this by any stretch. we do a fair amount of fairly pedestrian, ordinary stuff where you know, we're not able to exploit opportunities to anything like the degree that we were at Forest Way. But when you do come across the opportunity, this is where you get a reminder, I think, of what you're actually doing the job for. And you know, I think it's important to seize on these sorts of opportunities, to celebrate them, and to recognise that although, you know, perhaps every scheme isn't going to win awards, it doesn't matter. It's about what we can do to galvanise people's interest, to stimulate them, and take satisfaction from that, really. And we do plenty of work here where we've just made very, very small interventions and just asked the silly questions. We're working on a highway scheme at the moment where my colleague has managed to prevent the main contractor from fencing a lot of the wetland features along the side of the road, which are needed for stormwater attenuation. So you probably say they were Suds, although I'm not convinced they've been designed in the right way. We've been brought into the scheme, and one of the things we've been able to do is simply get the fences omitted. And that sounds like a pretty small and trivial thing, but actually it gives the opportunity for this to start to be explored by people. So instead of creating areas of unwelcomeness, if you like, you create things which people potentially can enjoy. And in detail, if we design marginal shelves into these features and we get the planting right and so on, and the management regimes are taken care of properly, now we start to make an interesting place. You know, and Alan Bennett, when he wrote his memoir, Untold Stories, made the point that places have stories. You know, they become meaningful to people. And one of the ways that places become meaningful to people surely is by accessing them and playing around in them. So lots of opportunities to do that, even though they may not be part of your brief.
We've got a question here. How can you encourage people to be prepared to allow this risk, especially if they're minded to fence an attenuation area and not have to worry? So we're going back to when you were talking about you know,
Right. Hello, you still there, Lauren?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Right, yeah. Good question. We have to be very, very positive about what the risks really are. When I started doing schools years ago, I was told that the #1 cause of death among high school age children, and we were doing high schools, was drowning, and it was simply repeated as a fact. And what I had to do was go on the Department of the National Statistics website and actually look at the numbers. And of course, when you present people with the numbers back and say that it's not actually, that's one of the ways that you can challenge the perceptions. It's a perception of risk rather than actual risk. Frequently fencing is put in simply because it's put in, and the kind of fencing that's put in just goes by the board. You know, no one challenges it. So the first thing is challenging that. I think there's room for some research that it may well exist that demonstrates what the actual hazard and risk, for instance, of water features really is. We did some work in Milton Keynes years ago, and the Milton Keynes Park Trusts are very interesting people to talk to, because of course they look after vast areas of water in Milton Keynes, and they're big advocates of not fencing these facilities because fencing them actually makes them, in many cases, more dangerous. It prevents people maintaining them properly, and it prevents them prevents people seeing into them. So if you're over the fence, you can't be easily seen and you can get into difficulties. But the statistics in places like Milton Keynes show that although water plainly has some degree of hazard, it's nothing like the degree of hazard that other features like roads and so on would have. So there are examples, you know, this is one, we're looking at it here, where the risk has been accepted and the management has been accepted. You won't win all the time, but unless you try, you're never going to win at all.
Yes, I think it's a good life lesson to live by there. Oh, excellent. Well, thank you, Janet, for the question, and thank you, David. But if there are no more questions, I will take this opportunity to, oh, wait, I will hold my thought. 1 second. You have touched on cost a couple of times. Can you say how the costs of this scheme, as in the slide at Colville, compares to just fencing?
Compares to, well, we know this was approximately £10 million school redevelopment scheme, and we know that the Suds approach to drainage, which is where we take the water in swales, that I'm not illustrating those, but there are swales coming from the car parks and around into this feature, saved of the order of £100,000 off putting attenuation tanks in, which we have done, unfortunately, on other school sites of a similar size. So it's a Suds approach saves money. I mean, manholes, typically on a manhole on a sewage system, pipe system might cost £1,000. So even getting rid of 10 manholes and lengths of pipe, you know, you can start to calculate the cost savings of using a Suds approach wherever you can, and letting the water just go into soft areas that way. So we know that one of the reasons why we managed to get so much into Leicestershire schools over the years is because it's cheaper. Contractors in a design build scenario won't spend money they don't have to. If there's a cheaper way of doing it, then they'll tend to do it. So attenuation tanks offer you no benefits from a school's perspective, and quite a big cost. There could be some advantages, of course, if you're in a very, very highly urbanized area and you want to park cars on the top of the tanks, or put a ball court in. But we find that in most school sites there is at least some green space, and making it multifunctional and drawing it in towards the building at site planning stage, that's very important, can be your cost saving. So that's not to say that all SUDS approaches save you money, but in the main, that's one of the arguments that we try to make. What are the actual costs, and how can we save money and give some, more importantly, give something back that can be used.
Great. You mentioned water quality at the beginning. Is it possible to say how this issue benefits from your approach in practice?
Not unless you monitor the water quality before and after. We know from anecdotal evidence that any treatment train, so if you take water from a hard surface which is polluted, say it's got hydrocarbons off a car park, and you filter that into the ground in a controlled way, into a substrate, and then let that filter through ponds, basins, just the soil, you can gradually take those pollutants out. You won't take all of them out. Heavy metals are difficult to address this way, and you might need some specialist advice if you're on contaminated sites. And this sort of treatment may not be appropriate, frankly, on some sites. But the short answer is that unless you actually monitor that water quality before, so you've got some sort of baseline, and then afterwards, you can't definitively say whether it's improving the water. However, what you can notice in certain situations, and this job at Forest Way probably isn't one of those, is that you can monitor biological quality of the water using invertebrate sampling, and we've done that on sites where we've managed to get a biological monitoring encapsulated in a landscape management plan. I perhaps didn't talk enough about landscape management plans, which is something that landscape designers tend to find very unsexy. But if you have an LMP, a good one running for 20 years can allow the provision of ongoing monitoring of that landscape in all its facets. So it could very well, and we have done this, require the applicant to periodically monitor water quality to check that the system is doing what it's designed to do. LMPs can be used for all sorts of other things, of course, ecological surveys, tree work, etc. But we think this is a particularly powerful tool to inform the process and actually learn from the sites that we've designed.
Yeah, quite right. Oh, Janet says, thank you very much, David. Some great answers there.
Oh, that's right. You're welcome, Janet.
Thank you. Okay, so...
Starting to enjoy this now.
Yeah, absolutely. You get into it after a while. Can I just take this opportunity to plug any future training we may have? So if you're interested in SUDS and you want to learn more and you want to dive very much deeper into it, we have upcoming Suds Seminars in York and Bristol. So on the 8th and the 9th of November, coming up very shortly now. You're still within the early bird ticket offer price, though. You can come and learn more from Sue Illman, our past president, and the CIC Floods champion, and Steve Wilson, who helps the aforementioned Syria and others, such like DEFRA, that produce their SUDS standards and their manual. So that is my plug done. And I will just wrap this up today and say thank you very much, David Singleton, for that wonderful presentation and some great stories and some great advice there. And if there's nothing else, we'll say goodbye. But not before I've told you about next week's webinar. So the next webinar is on, November 10th, and it's more in our Capability Brown series. It's Capability Brown's contribution to current ecological resilience, landscape character and ecosystem services, and that's with the wonderful Leslie Pearman, the Senior Heritage Advisor at Natural England. So tune in for that one. But thanks from me and thanks to David.
Thank you very much.
All right, goodbye.